Well, greetings and welcome to the Sunday preview for week 7 of our Focus on the Story. We're on chapter 8 in the story itself, but we're on week 7 of the sermon series because in the series this year there's 30 chapters in a book. We're only going to be going through 24 of them. So we're on, you'll be reading them at home, but we are on chapter 8, week 7. So read chapter 7 and 8 in preparation. And we are in the period of the Judges. Okay, the Judges is a very dark time in the history of the people of Israel. It lasted for 300 years. Our country is 60 years old. The period of the Judges' dark time was 300 years. For perspective, remember that Joshua brought them into the promised land in the book of Joshua after Moses died at the end of Deuteronomy. Joshua fit the battle of Jericho, brought them into the promised land, and like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, when he died, he says, okay, choose this day whom you will serve. But for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. That's how Joshua ends on a very positive note. We'll see in the book of Judges, which is the 7th book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. Ruth is what we'll be talking about next week. 300-year period of time when the people of Israel rebelled against God again and again. They chose to follow their own path. They chose to see things through their own eyes. I'll be talking about that in the sermon on Sunday, rather than through the eyes of the Lord. In a sense, what happened during the period of the Judges is I'll say on Sunday, they lost their story. They lost the inclination or the commitment that God was with them wherever they go, which we heard about in Joshua. And they started going their own ways. Again and again, they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So when we return to the story in January, we'll see how they wanted a king, King David, King Saul, all of that. But before the time of the kings, there was the period of the judges, when people did what was evil in God's eyes. They forgot God's plan and God's purpose for them. As you read through, there's all kinds of stuff that happens when they turn against God. God turns them over to the hand of the enemies and all that stuff. There is a rebellion, there's a repentance, there's restoration. Everything's good for a while, then they rebel. There is repentance, there's reconciliation. That cycle happens 7 times during the period of the Judges, and during that time, God raises up, I think it's 7 or 8 different judges to try to lead them in the way of God. And as soon as they got back on track, they went off the wagon again and did things that were evil in the sight of the Lord. Israel turned against God again and again in those cycles to worship pagans' God. They experienced the negative consequences of their actions. They cried out for God's help. God saved them, and God sent another judge. God raised up a judge to rule over them. So part of what we'll hear in our lesson for Sunday is the story of Deborah, a woman judge, quite remarkable back in those days, and how one of the army guys decided to follow her only if she went with him. He said, if you go with me, I'll go with you. So quite a remarkable thing. We'll talk about that and about a couple of other things in the sermon on Sunday. The cycle happens again and again. The Philistines, the Amorites, the Moabites all captured, destroyed parts of Israel, and then they repented, they were restored, And then the cycle happened again and again for 300 years. That's the biggest thing I'd like you to take from this about the period of the Judges, which we don't hear about too much because it was kind of the dark period in Israel's history when they kept turning against God. God raised up Deborah, Samson, Gideon. We'll hear about him in the adult forum on Sunday. And we'll see how the problem began when, time and time again, everyone did what was right in his or her own eyes. They were only concerned about themselves, what they might get out of it. They did whatever they wanted to do. Figure there was no consequences. Well, in God's world, there was. As you prepare for Sunday, think, has there ever been a time in your life when you ignored God's desire, or when you knew God was leading you, guiding you to do something, and you ignored it? You went the other way. You decided you knew what was better than God. Has that ever happened in some kind of way? You decided that you knew what was best, even though you had the natural inclination that there was a stirring in your heart that God really wanted you to do something. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go my own way. How were you affected by that? How were others around you affected by that? There are a couple of great stories that we'll talk about in the adult forum. I think we'll get to Gideon and to Samson, so make sure on Sunday you come to the adult forum. But remember how when things were bad with the people of Israel, they cried out to God, "Lord, save me." But when things were good, they forgot God. It's kind of a natural human inclination when things are going. When do you think most about God? When things are going well? I mean, that's why I personally have emphasized so many times gratitude journals, all kinds of things, the importance of gratefulness, of gratitude. Because if you're grateful, you see the hand of God working in your life. But sometimes if you don't focus on gratitude, sometimes you start to kind of go your own way and kind of do your own thing and only cry out to God when things get bad. So that's what the people of Israel did. They didn't thank God when things were going well. They only cried out to God when things were not going so well. So think of some of those things as you read chapters 7 and 8 in preparation for Sunday. Next Sunday, we'll be talking about Ruth. Fascinating story about a Moabite who, anyway, I won't preview that too much, but plan to come to church on Sunday. You'll hear much more about that cycle that happens 7 times in those 300 years, about different judges and what we can learn from that. So Thursday preview, just to give you a heads up. Work day is on Saturday. If you're able to make that, call into church and come on and we'll have a great time. Starting in January, when we start this again for the winter series, I think I'm going to do the Sunday preview on Fridays instead of Thursdays, but that's just a little heads up now. Until Sunday, do your reading, and it's great stuff to learn about. I think it'll tie in many things that you've heard about from the Old Testament, but now here it ties in and you know where the story's going. Look forward to seeing you, and until we see you, you take care. Bye-bye.